of Clearinghouse Review, a journal of poverty law and policy, published by the Sargent Shriver National Center on Poverty Law here in Chicago. On behalf of our editorial team, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, which is a companion to the article, Building Networks Online, Connecting Today's Poverty Law Advocates and Organizations to Meet Tomorrow's Challenges, that first appeared in our July-August 2009 issue of Clearinghouse Review. This webinar will be conducted by the authors of that piece, Matthew Burnett. Clearinghouse Review has been in continuous publication for more than 40 years, and it continues to be an essential tool for poverty law and legal services advocates around the country. As editors of the review, our goals are to provide substantive articles and information to make anti-poverty lawyers more effective in their practices, to keep them informed of poverty law developments and trends, to set an agenda for the anti-poverty law community, and to identify and promote novel legal strategies, especially on issues cutting across various substantive areas of poverty law. This includes aiding advocates in the effective use of technology to support and improve their practices, which is one of the reasons we're hosting today's seminar on the power of social media in a poverty law practice. Pro Bono Net is a national nonprofit organization based in New York City and San Francisco, working in close partnership with nonprofit legal organizations across the United States and Canada to increase access to justice for the millions of poor people who face legal problems every year without help from a lawyer. Pro Bono Net does this by supporting the innovative and effective use of technology by the nonprofit legal sector, increasing participation by volunteers, and facilitating collaborations among nonprofit legal organizations and advocates working on similar issues or in the same region. Pro Bono Net builds web platforms that offer powerful, sophisticated online tools to pro bono and legal aid advocates and provide critical legal information and assistance directly to the public. The Pro Bono Net model has been adopted in 30 states and regions, reaching approximately 2/3 of the poverty population and lawyers in the United States. Matthew Burnett is Pro Bono Net's Immigration Advocates Network Coordinator, and Kate Blato is the National Public Automated Documents Online Project Coordinator. A couple of items before we begin. First, please use the questions button on the dashboard on your screen to submit questions for the presenters. We will have them respond to your questions as time allows during the webinar. Second, after the close of the webinar, you will receive an email with a link to online resources related to the content of this webinar, including a recording and a link to a copy of the Clearinghouse Review article if you have not already read it. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn controls over to Kate Blato, who will begin the presentation.
Hi, I just wanted to let people know, many of you have probably heard of Twitter, and it's one of the social network sites that we'll be talking about today. But we wanted to let those of you who are already familiar with Twitter know that we have set up a hashtag, something you can follow to see what other people are saying about the session, and it is poundpovlaw.net. And for those of you who are interested, you can go to search.twitter.com and put in that hashtag, and that you'll be able to see what other people are saying and sort of messages that they're typing in. And you don't have to be a member of the site to do this. So if anybody is sort of wanted to play around with Twitter or see what it might be used for, that we thought this might be an opportunity for you to do that. So, and with that, I will turn it over to Matthew to get started.
Great. Thanks, Kate, and thanks, Jason, and the Shriver Center and the Clearinghouse team for hosting the webinar today. Let me just get this started so we can get going here. So as Jason mentioned, I'm the Immigration Advocacy Network Coordinator at Pro Bono Net, and Immigration Advocacy Network, or IAN, is a national network of nonprofit immigration legal services providers. And we use technology in lots of different ways to provide training and technical assistance to advocates in the field, including experimentation with social networking tools. And so some of the stuff that Kate and I will be talking about today is based on our own experience, both personally and professionally, with social networking, as well as giving some examples, which we didn't explore too much in the article of legal aid and public interest legal organizations in the field who are using these tools effectively and doing innovative things. As Jason also mentioned, we'll welcome your questions, and we hope to spend a good chunk of time both between the presentations that Kate and I are making, as well as at the end, to answer any questions that folks have as we go. So just to give you a brief overview, we're going to start and introduce some of the concepts around social networking and social networking sites. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about social networking as a tool for advocates to use in terms of their professional development, as well as networking with other advocates across the country. The third area that we're going to talk about is the role of social networks in the work of your organization. So thinking about things like marketing and outreach, advocacy, and connecting with your stakeholders. And then Kate's going to take it from there and talk a little bit about getting started with social networking tools and share some examples from the field and reflect a little bit at the end on some common concerns that advocates and organizations often have when they're starting to work with these tools.
Matthew, would you mind repeating that hashtag? We've had a couple of questions.
Sure. So it's hash POVLawNet. So POVLAWNET. Great. So the definition that we worked with in the article, and I think a really good one, was developed by Dana Boyd and Nicole Elson in an article that they wrote called Social Networking Sites, Definition, History, and Scholarship. And it's social networking sites are web-based services that allow individuals to construct a semi-public or public profile within a bounded system, and also to articulate a list of other users with whom they share a connection, and then finally to view and traverse their list of connections and those made by others within the systems. And so that provides kind of a good discrete definition of social networks, which in terms of their application often vary quite widely in the kind of tools and functionality that they provide. For the purposes of the article, we broke social networking sites down into three different areas: general sites, niche sites, and social media sites. And it's not a really easy thing to do to kind of describe and develop sort of separate definitions for each of these areas, and they often overlap. So it's not a perfect breakdown of the different kinds of sites that you may be working with, but it works pretty well for the purposes of a general definition. And so general sites are the sites that we hear about a lot. They're open to the public. They have millions of users. And examples include LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Those are sort of the top three, and the three that we're going to be talking about. There are others, certainly. One very popular site that's missing from this list is MySpace. And as we go through the demographics and psychographics in a little bit, I want to just mention that MySpace has a different set of demographics that might be of interest to client populations that you work with. So we're by no means kind of meaning to exclude other sites that may be useful to you, but we just are going to work with these three as examples. Niche sites are sites developed around specific interests or professions. And so within the legal profession, examples include Martindale-Hubbell Connected and a site from the ABA called Legally Minded. So these are sites really targeted at a certain group or sort of professional set of interests. And then the third category, and this is where it breaks down a little bit, are social media sites. And we're not going to talk about these today, but examples would be YouTube and Flickr, where you're posting user-generated content, but they also incorporate social networking features. So we're going to take a little break now and just do a poll. And the question is, which social media sites do you currently use? And this will help us to kind of target and tailor some of our presentation. So the options are Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, or other, or none. And the question is really about your use as personally as an individual. So we'll just give you a few seconds to fill that out.
And Matthew, we've had a couple of folks who can't hear very well, so I don't know any way for you to boost it on your end a little bit. But
I will move the mic closer.
Great.
See if that helps. And speak up. If you still can't hear me, let me know, and I'll try to resolve that. Okay, so let's see what the results are of the poll. Great. So it looks like, wow, a lot of you are using Facebook, 64%. 47% of you are using LinkedIn. 31% of you are using Twitter. That's fantastic. So it sounds like this crowd is, in many ways, familiar with a lot of these tools, which is great to hear. And I'll be interested in a little bit. We're also going to be doing a poll about the sites that your organizations are using. And so it'll be interesting to see if that carries over to organizations starting to adopt these tools more widely as well. Great. So let's go back to the slideshow. Let's see. Great. So now I just want to take a quick look, and again, this isn't something that we did in the article, but we wanted to give some context for the discussion that we're having today, and just look real quickly at some of the demographics around these social networks. So Facebook, which is a leading social network, has over 3 million active users. That's the equivalent of the United States population. According to their statistics, 50% of active users log in daily, and less than a third are college students. So it's not just younger folks that are using social networks these days. People over 35 represent the fastest growing age group, and more than 10 million users become fans of pages each day. And pages are ways that we'll look at for your organizations to have a presence on Facebook. And then finally, more than 2 billion pieces of content, and that's news stories, notes, photos, blog posts, etc., are shared each week. And more than 6 billion minutes of time are spent on Facebook each day, and that's a worldwide figure. So LinkedIn is quite different than Facebook in that its audience is really targeting professionals. And I think as we think about which social networks we want to employ to use in our advocacy and communications with client populations or with folks that may not be sort of the demographic represented by LinkedIn, we would think about using tools like Facebook and MySpace that might be better catered to those populations. So LinkedIn, the focus is on professional networking. 95% of its users are college educated. 64% of users are male. 53% of users have a household income of over $100,000, and the average age of users is 41. So clearly a very different demographic than you would find on Facebook or MySpace. And then the third one I just wanted to show is Twitter. Twitter's a relatively new social network, and you can see that second bullet point, unique visitors increased from 1.2 million in May 2008 to 8.2 million in May 2009. So in 1 year, it increased some 16 million users, or 17 million users. So it's seen a huge increase. Certainly, celebrity profiles like Oprah and Ashton have helped to fuel its success. But it's also a really unique and I think interesting tool to think about integrating into your both your individual and organizational use of social networking. Twitter is currently the third most used social network, and 93% of Twitter users have less than 100 followers. So that's something to think about when you're getting started. Realize that just over 1% have more than 500 followers, and less than 1% have more than 1,000 followers. And currently only 40% of Twitter's users are retained. So there's high levels of adoption, but there's also a lot of folks who are checking it out and either not understanding it or not seeing its utility in their lives or in their work, and so they're leaving it. Before, sorry, let's see if I can go back. Before we go on, I just wanted to to share a few areas where I think both advocates and organizations can make great use of social networking tools. One is just to engage supporters. Another is to recruit volunteers and law students, so using it as a recruiting tool, targeting populations that we may know are on social networks. So I think law students is a good demographic to think about in that area. Professional development and networking as an advocate. Keeping track of issues in the field. I learn about lots of stuff that's happening in the field that I wouldn't otherwise know about if it weren't for Twitter or Facebook updates. Learning about and sharing information about projects and best practices, including projects that you're working on or involved in. Fundraising, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and also something that Kate's going to talk about in greater depth, which is using these tools to listen to what other advocates or folks out and using these tools are saying about your organizations, or just more generally issues that you care about as an advocate. So for the first section around social networking for advocates, I wanted to discuss three things, and these were areas that we treated in some detail in the article. One is just the adoption, who's using these tools, and specifically within the legal sector, benefits, and then just a little bit about professionalism and ethics. And Jason, I just wanted to check in before I go on. It seemed like folks are able to hear me now?
Yeah, actually several people said they can hear you great.
Oh, great. Okay. So adoption, there are 4 surveys that we looked at. One was a survey conducted by the Shriver Center, and then there were 2 surveys that were done more widely in the legal sector, one by the ABA and another by LexisNexis, and then a final survey that we'll look at was done among adult Internet users. So they'll all shed different light on different groups of users and users with different interests. According to the Shriver survey, 30% of respondents reported using social networking sites. The most popular sites were LinkedIn and Facebook, and 7% said that social networking sites were extremely useful, 35% said they were useful, and 26% said they were somewhat useful. And in this survey, as with others, we saw a high correlation between age and social networking, with younger folks using or adopting social networking tools at much higher levels. The ABA survey was somewhat consistent, although the questions were a little bit different. 56% of respondents thought that social networking was important, and on the specific tools, 28% rated Facebook as helpful and 27% rated LinkedIn as helpful. An interesting, another area that this survey explored was the sort of what folks are using social networks for, and in this case, 61% of respondents said communicating with friends was most important. So that's good for us to know as we think about how to deploy our tools. And then 34% rated networking with legal colleagues as most important. So there seems to still be the larger proportion of users using it for personal as opposed to professional activities. Although the LexisNexis survey asked a similar question, and their results were that 49% used social networking for both personal and professional use, and 18% for only professional use, leaving 33% who reported using it for only personal use. And their figure was 54% of respondents reported being a member of a social network site. And again, a high correlation between age and adoption, which we see throughout all of the surveys. The final survey, which was in many ways the most in-depth survey, was the Pew Internet survey. 35%, or that survey found that 35% of American adult Internet users have a profile on a social networking site, and 22% of those were on Facebook, whereas only 6% were on LinkedIn. So we see much higher adoption of LinkedIn within the legal sector than we do outside of it. 89% of respondents said that they use social networks to stay in touch with friends, and 43% said they use social networks to organize with others for an issue or event. So that's something to think about. Just less than half are using these tools to organize and collaborate on issues or events that they care about. And then finally, 28% use social networks to promote themselves or their work, so that professional use of social networking. Just some sort of takeaways. Again, the methodology and question sets for each of these surveys were very different, so it's hard to find true consistencies across the board. But overall, social networking adoption was higher among younger lawyers and adults and higher among legal professionals than the general online adult population. But in the Shriver survey, which is admittedly a smaller sample, we saw a slightly lower adoption among advocates. And then finally, it seems, based on these surveys, that social networking is used more often for personal networking than professional networking, although in a little bit we'll talk about how personal and professional sometimes blur, and both reasons why that's a good thing, and also reasons to be careful when you're networking online. So in terms of the benefits, around professional networking, the real clear benefit is working with other professionals who are interested in similar issues as you are, keeping track of what your colleagues are working on, reconnecting with past colleagues, connecting with individuals who do similar work or share some of the same interests. So really using social networks is the same kind of tool and benefit as you would get out of doing other kinds of professional networking, attending bar association events, conferences, and working group meetings with your colleagues. Because you don't have the same constraints around space and time with social networking, the benefits of social networking are that you don't have to necessarily be at one place at one time in order to drive the value. Another area that's really beginning to develop, and I think becoming more useful as time goes by, is in the area of collaboration. Specifically on LinkedIn, there's a tool called Groups, which allows you to start a group on a topic and then have folks join your group, and you can choose whether or not to admit them or not. There's currently a group called the Legal Aid Group, which is actually, Kate's going to look at in a little bit, but that's a good example of a group that might be of interest to this audience, and I think is fairly active in addressing issues that legal aid organizations are dealing with. I've seen stuff, that the focus is sometimes more technology-based, I think, because of the tool, but discussions around fundraising and working with pro se clients, partnerships with courts, a whole range of issues that group explores. And then finally, something that I work a lot on is resource and information sharing, and so using these tools like Facebook and Twitter to share information on cases, on news, on practice alerts, and other areas targeted at advocates or individuals in the community who are working on the same issues that you're working on. And then there's a category of specialty sites called, or one of which is called JD Supra, which allows advocates to share actual work product. So just a little bit on professionalism and ethics. I think one of the most difficult areas to make sense of as an advocate working with these tools is that distinction between personal and professional. Lots of folks who I follow on Twitter or Facebook or other tools are not necessarily making the distinction between their views as an individual and their views vis-a-vis the organization that they work for. And I think that might potentially cause concern, or it's an issue at least to address as an organization wanting to develop a policy around social networking. But I also think that it speaks well to the kind work that we do and the personal investment that we have in our work, and that in some ways just understanding that that's a distinction that's not always easy to make, but also understanding that we're all human and we care about the work we do, and that oftentimes our personal views and our personal lives bleed into our professional lives and work that our organizations are doing. So that's just something to be aware of. As we said in the article, it's typically not that difficult to undo something you've done using one of these tools, but oftentimes, since the syndication happens so quickly, that someone can see it before you have the opportunity to take it back. So that's just something to be careful about. The other thing is to just remember your what you learned in your ethics courses in law school, basic attorney-client rules, client confidentiality, attorney advertising, and things like that. There's more and more work that's being done in this area. Bars are beginning to take more notice, and there's already a number of good articles that have been written that are going to be available on your or on the resource page that gets sent out as part of the webinar. So just something to be aware of, and if you have questions, you would consult with your bar counsel or your state bar regulations if you have questions on those issues, just as you would any other issue. So I think with that, we're going to do another poll. In this one, we're going to ask which of the following social media sites your organizations currently use. And again, the choices are more or less the same. So we'll give you a few seconds to fill that out.
While you're doing that, I'd just like to remind everyone that everyone registered for this webinar will receive an email shortly after the webinar is over with links to a number of helpful online resources, including links to the PowerPoint slides from this presentation and a recording of the webinar. So for those of you wanting to know if you need to take notes or anything like that, it will all be available to you after the webinar is over, and you'll get that in your email inbox.
Great. Thanks, Jason. And also at the end of the webinar, we'll be providing our email addresses if folks have follow-up questions that they'd like to ask. Great. So this is, again, I'm surprised at the level of adoption. So it looks like Facebook, currently organizations have, or 34% of organizations have Facebook profiles. LinkedIn, 13%, and Twitter, 19%. That's really impressive. So again, it sounds like everyone is beginning to think about how these tools are integrated into their work, which is fantastic. Great. So then the next section I wanted to talk about is social networking for organizations. And I think that the issues and concerns here are really markedly different than those for advocates. A lot of stuff around advocacy is really how do you leverage these tools for your own personal and professional growth. And the question for organizations is how do we leverage these tools to support our mission. And so I'm going to start out by talking a little bit about advocacy and some areas where you might think about using social networking tools, and then I'll discuss a little bit about fundraising and then some information from a general nonprofit survey on issues of staffing and budget and policies. So wherever possible, we tried to find research that actually told us what the culture of organizations using social networking tools is. And so our approach is hopefully to provide a kind of baseline for the work that nonprofits are doing in this area. We don't have a lot of data on the poverty law sectors or the public interest sector specifically, but hopefully over time we'll begin to develop that as well. So around advocacy, this survey is called the Nonprofit Social Networking Survey, and it was done by 3 organizations, the NTIN, which is the Nonprofit Technology Network, Common Knowledge, and the Port. And it was released in April of this year. It surveyed 980 nonprofits, so it's a pretty large sample, and nonprofits both small, medium, and large, and from a variety of different sectors, including civil rights. So 86% of respondents reported that their organization has a presence on some form of commercial social network. Facebook was the most popular at 74%, and then that was followed by YouTube at 46% and Twitter at 43%. LinkedIn was lower at 32%, and MySpace was at 26%. And then 85% of respondents said that their primary purpose for social networking is marketing, or to promote their overall programs, their services, and their brand. And I think that's good news for nonprofits, because it's likely that as the different social networking sites and tools develop, they'll look more and more to developing ways in which you can interact and get feedback around your programs and your services. An example of that is on Facebook. There are actually pretty good analytics tools that allow you to see who your audience is, where they are, and the kind of level of interaction with your page. So the more feedback and comments and likes that you get for things that you post, the higher that number is, that sort of interaction indicator. And I think that that's a good tool for folks to kind of understand what the value of social networking is, which is really to provide a space in which your stakeholders and your the folks that you're messaging to are able to interact and engage with you on a level that they weren't able to using traditional outreach and marketing communications tools. In addition to kind of the straightforward outreach and marketing and communications, I think there are a number of other areas that we tried to identify and think about, either through examples of folks doing this already, or areas that we thought might be useful to start thinking about using social networking tools around. One is kind of the know your rights and dissemination of substantive legal information. This could be targeted more at advocates or more at the public, but I think providing news and case summaries, changes in the law, practice updates, things like that, is a really useful tool, and it's a way for you to engage other attorneys or the public in the work that you do and how your work intersects with those substantive issues. Recruiting volunteers and law students and new attorneys. I've, through social networking, found folks to work with legal aid organizations on either technology or on social networking specifically. I think that it's a relatively small community still, and specifically within the sort of public interest sector, and it's really great to get to know and understand and learn more about the work that different individuals and organizations are doing. I think also around, in addition to just the recruitment piece of it, I think just providing a context in which volunteers and pro bono attorneys can connect with one another, and even you develop mentoring or supportive relationships using these tools. And then I think also just connecting with other advocates in an area of law to discuss emergent issues or identifying systemic problems. And then a final area is sort of highlighting issues that affect low-income communities in your organization to work and protect their rights, and this might be targeted more at donors or folks who are stakeholders in your organization or you're working with, to let them know the work that you're doing on behalf of the community. So fundraising is sort of, it's a big topic, and it's something that we didn't treat in great depth, but it's also something that we recognize folks are typically interested in using social networking tools for. And part of the reason is that a number of commercial social networking sites have modules that allow you to collect donations. And so, on Facebook, it's not very hard. In probably less than an hour, you can set up a way for your fans to donate to your organization. The problem with that is it's not particularly successful, and online fundraising in general is typically the least successful way to raise money for your organization. And I'm sure that many of you who've tried it have learned that. But if you do want to go and do work in this area, I think you want to think about its impact on other fundraising initiatives and how you interact with your donors, and specifically individual donors, and think about how these tools, instead of attracting new donors, might actually provide a more convenient or efficient way for them to support your organization. And then, telling them that story and having them understand your motives and reasons why you want to use these tools as opposed to traditional mechanisms to get those donations. I think it's important to speak with folks who've done this before, development professionals or even consultants who work on fundraising. Ask them about their experiences. And then probably most importantly, just be sure to look at organizations who are working in the same space that you are and understand, what is the ratio of fans to donations, what are the amount of donations. And I think overall you might find them to be quite small. I think the surveys that we were looking at showed that on Facebook, only three organizations had raised more than $100,000, and only 88 had raised $10,000. So, it's in the survey, nonprofit social networking survey, had similar results. I think 29% raised less than $500 over the preceding 12 months, or the 12 months preceding the survey. So we're not seeing big numbers. What we are seeing, though, is some creative approaches, and I think there are examples through both Twitter and Facebook where organizations have been really innovative, and they've gotten the attention and their causes that are supported with significant donations. So I think looking at how to place yourself and make this something that's part of a larger initiative and ties into other fundraising and development work you're doing is also important. So lastly, just a little bit on staffing, budget, and policies. Again, we wanted to share some results from others, from the surveys to provide kind of a baseline. According to the nonprofit social networking survey, 80% of nonprofits dedicated at least a quarter of a position to social networking activities. The numbers sort of go down from there. As you can imagine, very few organizations had a full-time staff person working on social networking initiatives, and typically those that did are very large organizations. I think the staffing model should be based on your priorities, the impact you want to have, and your overall goals. And I think it's really important, in my experience, to split time between your program staff and your marketing or communication staff. I think if you have those roles in your organization, you already know how program staff or folks doing direct services perhaps are telling those client stories to the communication staff. And I think that's just a really important relationship to cultivate so that those messages are getting out and you're leveraging the folks, the stories coming from the field and the work that you're doing in the advocacy, and making sure that those get to the folks who are actually doing the messaging. And that's certainly the same with social networking initiatives. In terms of budget, the survey found that 40% of nonprofits said they had some budget or for external resources to support social networking. A great advantage of social networking is that there's very little barrier to getting started. As Kate will show you, it doesn't take a lot. And typically, the commercial social networks are all free to join and use. But there are some costs to think about, and so if you're going to have to do any design work around, getting your logo the right size or shape to go on your Facebook page, or any work that you need to do around consulting or working with development professionals, marketing, if you're using social networks to do marketing and outreach. I think those are all costs that you need to think about, and also think about how your social networking brand or your overall organizational brand works into your social networks, and ensuring that the same sort of principles around your brand and expectations around the sort of look and feel of your website and other online branding are matched as you begin to explore the social networks as well, and so that experience is more seamless and folks can identify your brand and your organization and your work and not sort of thrown together. And then obviously, if you decide to not use the commercial social networks and you want to develop something on your own, not only is that going to be a lot more expensive for you, it's also going to be you won't be able to leverage the same benefits as you do with the commercial social networks. There isn't a built-in 3 million people in your individual social network to begin to develop relationships with. So I think that it would be a special kind of instance where you would want to do that, but there are tools such as Ning that allow you to do that, and I think you just want to think about the cost associated. In that case, the costs are relatively low, but it may not have the same audience as you'd want it to tap into as some of the larger social networks. And then a final piece to sort of think about as an organization is your organization's policy. I think one of the things just outside of the questions around employees using social networks and the distinction between personal and professional is just to create a system to keep track of your organizational accounts and to update passwords when they get changed. So, it's likely if you're experimenting in this area, 1 or 2 people know about the account or the passwords or how to tap into them, and I think that it's important to create a kind of central place for those to be kept and updated over time. I think also it's really important, as I talked about a little bit, to integrate your social networking initiatives with other marketing communication activities. It should be pretty seamless. And I think also understanding that social networking is much more distributed and less formal than traditional approaches like press releases. And so having a press contact or the kind of hierarchy that may exist in organizations around speaking to the press may not be appropriate for social networks. At the same time, it may not be the best approach to put the college intern who's working with you over the summer on defining your social networking strategy. I think it's important that that be part of a conversation with management and leadership within an organization to understand how these tools are going to be used. And then to revisit your policies often so that you have the ability to incorporate the lessons learned and the experiences you've had into your policies and have them inform your policies and changes to your policies that reflect the direction that your organization wants to take these tools. And then I think it's important, the final thing, and this just touches back on the sort of issues with employees using social networking tools and representing your organization. I think just have a clear policy on what might be considered sort of unofficial activities and how your organization is reflected in posts that folks make, perhaps candidly or not thinking about how they would reflect on your organization, and just have an understanding as you would in other spaces, I think, about how your employees or colleagues are representing your organization online. So I think that's it. I'm going to turn it over to Kate now, and she's going to give you some background on getting started as well as show some examples from the field.
And Matthew, before we do that, I have a couple of questions, if you wouldn't mind.
Oh, great. Thanks.
Them. Sure. One question is, what is the distinction between the social networking sites that you've been talking about and some other things that folks might be familiar with, such as IRC chat rooms and instant messaging and things like that?
Well, typically, that's a great question, because in some ways they work the same. With instant messaging, the relationship is likely between the individual and a set of friends or colleagues who they've approved and are, sort of friends or members of their chat service. And so I think that with the potential with tools like Twitter, which feels a lot like instant messaging, I think, is that unless your profile is private, those messages go out to the public. And so there's the potential that through the search or through folks browsing your profile, they would be able to see the messages. And it's really sort of one-to-all as opposed to one-to-one. And then even Twitter, within your profile or within your group of contacts, I think that if you do have your Twitter profile private, then all of your contacts will be able to see what you're saying, unless you use a special form of tweeting that sends a direct message to someone specifically. So it sounds all very complicated. It's really not, but it's sort of a good point to think about making sure you understand these tools before you use them, so you don't end up sending a private message to all of your friends and colleagues. And also, I think understanding, if there are private things that should be kept private, to think about other forms of communication where there's not the potential to make those things public, and just sort of, understanding the best tools to use for specific kinds of communication, just like you might not email someone that about something that really should be done in person.
Thanks. I had another question about when the surveys that you cited were done. I believe ours, the Schreiber Center one, was done about a year and a half or so ago. It's, in a fast-moving world, we should probably do it again and see what kind of results we get. But ours is about that old. Do you recall how old the other surveys are?
Yeah, they're all really recent, and we are fortunate, actually, that a number of them were released just as we were doing the article, or two of them. So the ABA survey, I believe, was from 2008, and then the Nexus survey was also from 2008, and I believe then the last survey from Pew was done in July of, let me see here, I think it's May of 2008. So they're all fairly recent.
Great. I had a couple of folks ask if there are any sample policies that they can look at for social networking use by organizations or individuals in organizations. I believe we are going to provide some of those in the link in the email that we'll be sending after the webinar, but maybe you can talk a little bit more about the resources that are out there to help folks develop their own policies around the use of these networks.
Sure. So there are a few different articles that we have in the resources, and then I believe that there are also some sample policies that we might be able to add from the legal services community, which are either on the Legal Services National Technology Assistance Project, LSNTAP website, or they're currently being collected for the website. So we'll make sure to get those resources to folks as they're available. There is an article from law.com which we have in the resources page that talks about drafting a social networking policy. It is more from the perspective of a law firm and not a legal services organization, but I think it's a useful kind of guide and one that we pulled out. There's also, and that's by James Wong, and it's called Drafting Trouble-Free Social Media Policies. Great.
And one last thing, as we can see from some of these survey results, there's still a fairly sizable percentage of advocates who are not on social networks or are not in organizations that use them. Do you just have any thoughts? There's some expression of intimidation and sort of uncertainty about jumping into these networks if one hasn't used them before. Do you just have any maybe just tips or ideas on the best way for people to do that?
Sure. I think that's it's a really important question. It's also one that's ultimately kind of a personal question, and I think it goes to sort of an individual's expectation of privacy, and also sort of how open and sort of transparent they want to be about the work that they do or about their personal lives. And I think, for me, it's LinkedIn was a pretty easy choice initially because it's a professional network. You're sharing information about your work, awards and other things. It's fairly static. There's no need to really update things over time, and you can derive some really pretty significant benefits just being connected in with the community, having folks, connect with you, either past colleagues or current colleagues. And I think most folks will find as soon as they start getting tied into these networks, they grow over time just because the software is built to kind of make connections for you and display folks who you may know or have an interest in knowing. I think on Twitter, it's really the question is if you're going to use the tool, whether or not you want your profile to be public or private for an organization. Obviously, I think it should be a public profile because that's the point is to sort of reach either existing or new supporters. Although, as a personal decision for me, I've decided to make my personal Twitter profile private, and I tend to be less generous with, the approving folks to see my tweets only because I think it's a space for me to kind of talk about things that are more parts of my personal life or my work that I might reflect on, perhaps the way that in sharing resources, the way that I feel about certain issues. I think that's something that for me I just want to kind of know who's seeing my tweets, and that's something that could change over time. But for the most part, I think it really comes down to your sort of personal interests, what your goals are for using social networks, and understanding, as an individual advocate, how important is it to you to build a reputation in the field for a certain area, and how, is that something that you can begin to leverage? There's a lot of folks that I wouldn't have known about or their work or their interest without social networking. Or, even you get sort of more of a glimpse of their personal lives, their family, and sort of the work that they do outside of work or things that they're involved in. So I think that's a really interesting and neat kind of benefit of social networking, is that you really get to develop a fuller picture of folks than you might otherwise if you're only on a call with them once a month. So I guess it really comes down to your own goals and what you hope to get out of social networking.
Great, thanks. And for those of you participating in our webinar, please keep those questions coming using that questions feature on the dashboard. So we can go ahead and turn this over to Kate now.
Excellent. Well, as Jason mentioned at the beginning, I am Kate Blato. I am now the Law Help Interactive Project Coordinator. We just changed the name of my project from NPADO to Law Help Interactive. And I think just a little bit of background information about my position that will give you some insight into some of the things I say is the fact that I'm actually a remote worker for Pro Bono Net. I work out of my home in Baltimore. And with social networking, one of the things that I've found is that I've been able to stay in contact just with employees of Pro Bono Net in different offices that, similar to what Matt just said in terms of working with people, that you often sort of have a meeting with somebody once a month and you may not get to sort of any of the extra information that I find that often when I'm on staff calls that I miss some of the chit-chat that happens in the office, that, you know, what's happening while you're waiting for everybody to get into the room for a meeting. And that social networking has been a really great way to sort of keep some of that up without everybody needing to necessarily be in the same place at once. And so that sort of is where I come from in a lot of the social networking I do. And so I get to do sort of the exciting pieces of looking at how do you get started and sort of how you thoughtfully get started in terms of social networking, and then looking at some examples from the field that there's a lot of good work happening out there, and then talking about a few of the concerns that people usually have. In terms of getting started, it's a pretty easy process. That you can just jump in and sort of sign up for a site and, you know, connect with the people that are there. And as an advocate, that may be sort of your, you know, how you decide what you do. There may be a group of advocates on a site that you want to get set up with and sort of start connecting with people you already know. But as an organization, I would encourage you to do a little bit more research and a little bit more thought about how you go ahead and get started first. And that I've pulled together sort of just a general list of steps, you know, listening, setting your goals, picking a site and setting up your profile, connecting with a few people, and then starting to ask questions and network. And that granted, all of these are sort of, they're not one after the other sort of steps, that as soon as, you know, you don't stop listening when you set your goals or when you pick the site and set up your profile, and that you may have an idea of what goals you want to accomplish before you even start listening. But to walk through these a little bit more, the first one is listening. And that this is very sort of similar in talking with my colleague Claudia Johnson, that I think of it as a little bit as learning as well, sort of figuring out what's happening online. And so, I mean, many of you may already be doing some of this just in terms of what you do as part of your usual day, that you may have news feeds or web pages that you check. You may go to Google News and search for your organization's name or your own name, information about the project you're working on or topics that you're working with. And so here that I've actually have a picture of the Google blog site where you have you can go and that Google will search blog specifically for whatever phrase you're looking for, and here that they pulled up the information about the Legal Services Corporation. It was sort of an interesting time because they had just recently had their Justice Gap report come out, so there was quite a bit of information. And that there are many, many websites where you can do these sorts of searches to figure out where people are talking about what and what sort of conversations are going on, if people are saying good things or bad things, if they're sort of questions that they have, but that it is pretty to go to these websites every day and sort of check in on that, or even every week to check in on each of these websites and go back and type in the information, is pretty time intensive. And so one of the neat things that sort of has grown along with the social networking piece is that you can bookmark these sites either in what's called a news reader, or that you can have it send you an email. And that on the Google sites, at the very least, that down on the left-hand side, that there's the blog alerts. There's also, I believe, a news alerts, and there may be a search alerts. And you can, right there, that you can sign up and have it send you email. Or sort of as you get into this sort of what I found to be more efficient way is that I've signed up in my news reader, which is basically I bookmark a whole bunch of sites, and that Google takes, and when I open it up, it has a list of all of the articles that I'm interested in on different topics, as well as different web pages that I'm watching. And so here that you can see in terms of my listening, this is my reader, a picture I took of it, and that I listen on Technola, which is a blog that Matthew and I publish together. I listen on Pro Bono Net. I listen generally to sort of access to justice issues, and that they're all collected here, and that I can go down and sort of scan pretty quickly to see if there are any articles of interest. And that, for example, the one I have highlighted here is just a piece about the University of Michigan Law School students pledging time for pro bono work. But what was interesting about it for me was the fact that it didn't mention Pro Bono Net in it, but that it actually linked to an article on the Pro Bono Net site. And through one of the services I found called Back Tweets, that it was searching for those places where it was highlighting resources that linked to the Pro Bono Net site. And so I'm able to figure out who's using that content and sort of how they might be using it. And so by using different things, Back Tweets, the search.twitter.com, different searches like that, that you're able to figure out where conversations are happening and sort of where people who are interested in issues that you're interested in are having those conversations, so you can connect with them. So once you sort of have this idea of where those conversations are happening, that you can sort of see, you have a better idea of what's happening within the landscape, who's doing what, sort of what other legal aid organizations, pro bono programs might be doing, and that you can move on to sort of thinking about what your goals might be. Figuring out what you hope to accomplish, whether it's doing outreach to a potential client community, or whether it's sort of just raising awareness of your program within, maybe there's a whole bunch of nonprofits in your area that are on Twitter or Facebook, and that you want to connect with them so that they know that you're there and that they can refer people. Based on sort of what this, the goal that you initially come up with, that you can target your activities to achieving that goal. For example, if you want to connect with the nonprofit organizations, that you want to spend your time communicating with them rather than, chatting with friends or those sorts of things. It's very easy to lose track of time when you're on social network sites, and typically what happens for people who are experts is that they actually will set timers or set a specific amount of time that they can devote to the site on a day, and then when they're done with that, they're done. And so looking at it that way, that you'd be better able to sort of target your activities to achieve the goals that you're looking to achieve. However, I think that everybody's playing and experimenting a little bit with social network sites, that they're not something, there's a lot of research out there, but there's not as much research as there is into, direct mail fundraising or, things that have been around longer. So people are still trying to figure out how social networking sites can best be used and how you can get a return on your investment and what sort of return that is. And so you also need to be open to sort of unexpected benefits and possibilities. Figuring out, one of the things for me is that when I started using social network sites, Twitter in particular, that it wasn't the idea that I would be able to connect specifically with people in terms of coworkers and have a deeper relationship with them. But it's one of the things that has happened for me, which has been sort of one of the unexpected benefits. Once you have set your goals, that you can pick a site and sign up. It's the easiest part of the process. That you, as you can see here for the images of the sign up for Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, that they're all fairly similar, that they don't ask you for a lot of information, and that you could probably take half an hour and be set up, initially set up with all of them and have an account. The time that it actually takes, and the reason that you want to pick one site and sort of is the fact that actually engaging with people on that site and making use of that profile is where your time goes. It is possible to have Facebook update Twitter and update LinkedIn and sort of connect all of them, but that really sort of makes it hard to develop a unique community on those sites, and that people can generally tell whether or not you've posted from that specific site. And so in terms of sort of investing time, you really want to think about whether, if you're just looking to get some information out there, that maybe it is good to link all of them together. But if you're really looking to connect with other advocates, being able to ask them questions, that you want to sort of pick a site, look at who is joining that site, what the population is, and see if it's sort of the people that you want to connect with. For example, one of the things that people have found is that MySpace tends to be looking at sort of there's a lower income group there that is looking for information. And so that if you're looking to do a client project, that MySpace may be a place to actually do put that project together, whereas if you're looking for law students and volunteers, that you may actually be looking at Facebook, because those typically students who go to college typically have Facebook pages, and that law students are on there, and that's where you find your volunteers. And so you really sort of need to think about those different pieces as you're signing up for the site. And that sort of all of that being said, that there is nothing wrong with just signing up for the site and letting your account stay there. That if your organization, one of the things that we found with website domain names is that unsavory people have taken and registered legal aid organizations for their URLs. And so one of the things that your organization might consider doing, even if you're not ready to start social networking, is to sign up on each of the accounts so that you have those accounts if you want to use them, and so that no one else would be able to squat on your username or whatever it happened to be, what describes your organization the best. After you've picked your site and you've signed up, that you then start connecting with people. And because LinkedIn is a pretty safe site, that it is professional connections, that people are pretty reserved, that I'm showing you the screens from those with hope that those of you who don't have a social network site profile, that you might go out there and sort of try LinkedIn after this presentation. And what happens is after you sign up, often that they ask you to enter email addresses of people that you know, or enter your email, a web email address with a password, so that they can go and collect your contacts. As poverty law advocates, there are a few sort of reasons why you might use one or the other. That if you do a lot of communication with your clients through a webmail or something like that, you may not want to take and give them your email and your password. They don't store your password, but they will take and that they will pull in all of the email addresses for your clients, which may not be something that you want to share with LinkedIn. And it may not be something that you want to be notified every time a client who hasn't been on LinkedIn joins up. It doesn't require you to connect with them, but it does give them some information about being connected. That being said, there's not many programs that I know of that are doing a lot of email communication with clients, and that generally there are quite a few people who do use giving them your email and your password. If you're looking to connect with just a few people, that it's certainly possible to use the enter your email addresses. And frequently for myself, after I come back from conferences and that I've met people, that I'll take the business cards and I'll add the email addresses into LinkedIn to see if they're there and learn a bit more about people and add them to my network. Helps me to not just set the business card aside and forget that I ever met this person. And then once you've added your connections, that they actually get shown on your profile, and that we can see a few of Matthew's and my shared connections here actually on LinkedIn, people that we've worked with together, and that show up, depending on your privacy settings, either show up to your connections or they can show up to the public. Most people opt to have them just show up to their connections because it's an awful lot of information for people to have, or at least my opinion is that that's a bit more information than I'm comfortable with people having about me in terms of making it available to the public. And once you've connected there that you actually can start networking and asking questions. A lot of the time, once you join a social network site, you sort of think, okay, I've joined, what next? And that it's a matter of sort of starting to get involved on LinkedIn as on sort of Twitter and Facebook, that there are multiple ways of communicating with people. In particular on LinkedIn, that you can send a message directly to one person, or you might join a group such as the Legal Aid group and post questions there. And if you don't know something about social networking, or you don't know how to do something on the site, that these are, reach out to somebody that you do know as a connection and say, hey, I want to do this. Do you know how I would do that? Or reach out to one of, your groups in terms of posting a discussion and say, hey, I'm, a legal aid advocate that I want, to start using some social networking. This is what I want to do. Does anyone know how to do that? That they're, generally I found that people on social network sites are very open and very helpful, that they're there to meet other people and make connections, and that having those sorts of communications are one way to make connections. One of the other sort of questions that people have in terms of networking is that they often don't want to go directly to the site to sort of keep track of what's happening. And that there are a couple of different ways that you can do that, specifically with MySpace and Facebook and Twitter. I'm not certain about LinkedIn, but that there are several different applications. The one that I use is called TweetDeck, which allows me to separate the people I follow into different groups so that I know during the day that I'm interested in what my Access to Justice community is talking about and what's going on, and whether people are announcing that they've received new grants or have an idea about a grant opportunity. There's also, you can do a similar thing for Facebook and MySpace. Another application that people use is called, well, it was called TwitterFox, but has now been renamed to Echo Phone, in that it allows you to really easily share links from Twitter, from Firefox, and sort of send those to your community and still figure out what's happening. And that, I think that that is sort of the tool that Matthew prefers to use most of the time. So it really depends on sort of how your personal preferences and what you decide to use. And a lot of people are still comfortable wanting to go to the site and sort of checking things out there, and there's nothing wrong with that either. So moving on and sort of thinking about how people are actually using social networking sites, that there are a lot of legal aid and pro bono programs out there that have done sort of made initial steps, and even more than initial steps, in terms of using these sites. The first site I'm going to look at is sort of examples of people who are using Twitter. Immigration Advocates is one of those, and that Matthew has set up, or one of his colleagues has set up, a direct feed from their website to their Immigration Advocates account. So it pulls from where they post new cases and news and other things, and that it takes and it posts them for a wider community, and so that they get some of the news and cases that are happening. It also looks sort of from here that Matthew also supplements that with other materials, such as some jobs and other things. Another group that I've been following is Legal Aid DC, that they're a little bit different in terms of the fact that they are directly posting to the web. If you look here, that it's directly from somebody in their organization posting about blog posts that they have, about issues with funding that they've been having, and that they actually hear that there's a message that says RT, which is short for retweet, or also sort of just basically a forwarding of what somebody else is saying, in this case Joni_pod, about an article that she posted that might be interesting to Legal Aid DC's followers. And then sort of a third example that I have is a legal aid attorney out of Idaho. It is actually, he started on his sort of personal time as part of his own personal development, taking and reading cases in law and doing a 140-character summary of them and posting them. And as he's been doing more work with Twitter and sort of gotten used to it, he's been doing more interacting with other people and sort of more posting of personal information, sort of, things about hockey games he may be interested in, and then, things about conferences that he's attending. One of the things that I would never have run across him in terms of my work, day-to-day work, but that I found out through Twitter that he's a huge housing advocate and that there were some housing issues in Idaho with subsidized housing, and that he was sort of a lead attorney on that case, letting people know what was happening in terms of their client community, and that he did use Twitter for that as well. A couple of other really interesting examples, again in D.C., that they've been, like everyone else, having issues around budget cuts, and that they found sort of disproportionately that programs for the poor are being cut, and so they pulled together a group of organizations that are working on that under a project called Save Our Safety Net, and that they've, through multiple channels, not only the website that they set up here, but also through Twitter and I believe through Facebook, are announcing information about that, sort of what is going on, places where people can come and testify and sort of support, talk about how they don't approve of those budget cuts. And so it's been a really interesting thing to watch, because also that they've also had a hashtag that they can tag tweets with, and that they'll, around sort of the group that I follow, because I live just outside of D.C., that I've seen a lot of those hashtags on different posts saying Save the D.C. Safety Net. And so it's interesting to see who will get involved and forward around that information. Another example from the field is that there's the National Pro Bono Celebration happening October 25th through the 31st, and that they have added a widget to the site, that they have a Twitter campaign, but they've added a piece on their website down on the right side where it aggregates tweets about the Pro Bono Week celebration, and that in addition to taking and pulling things that have the hashtag #PB Week, that they also have some other criteria that they're able to get in there so that it gathers things that talk about Pro Bono Week. It's a really sort of nice way for people who are coming to this website but may not use Twitter to see what other people are talking about. So the next site, looking at our examples about Facebook, that there are quite a few programs on there I found, but that at the point that I looked at, I was looking for some interaction, and that because it was later at night, I may have missed some of it. But the Shriver Center site, that they've pulled together quite a few fans, that they have posted videos, that they have friends, sort of national friends, that they're able to do that, in addition to sort of the news that you see here, that people who come here can take, and that they can comment on these, that they may just sort of click the link like, so that we'll give it a thumbs up, that they may opt to share it with friends, and that they can also come to this profile to suggest to friends who may be interested in being a fan of the Shriver Center. It's worth saying that on Facebook, to be a fan of something doesn't take a whole lot of effort, that just like the Shriver Center, that there are also groups for peanut butter and jelly and, sort of other fairly trivial things, and that it is really easy for people to sign up. And so in terms of figuring out whether this is successful for you, I wouldn't necessarily go number of fans, but looking at more so how you're able to get people engaged and using some of the analytics that Matthew talked about. Another group that is using this is from the wider nonprofit technology field, but Beth Cantor has put together a page for her blog that actually pulls together, using a tool called Sprout, her Twitter feed, information from her blog, and makes it a little bit different than the actual content on sort of the typical Facebook page. And then another one is just an example of the Montana Justice Foundation, that they have a person who said that they like that sort of different interactions. And then a couple I think that we've seen from LinkedIn, that there's the Immigration Advocates Network, and then the Legal Aid group, with sort of different discussions that they've been having. To talk a little bit, I'm going to keep it pretty brief because I do want to leave some extra time for questions. But I wanted to talk just a little bit about some common concerns. One that I was following sort of what people were saying on Twitter, and that Ken Montenegro thought that I was going to talk about whether or not this was worth it or not. But I'm going to assume that sort of in these concerns that people have to make that decision for themselves, that no matter sort of what I say, that they're probably not going to change their mind about whether it fits into their lifestyle and is worth it. The things that I want to talk about are items that anybody who's using the site needs to have in their mind and sort of think about. One being privacy, that there's a lot of information that you're putting out there, but one of the things to think about is sort of what you're comfortable putting out there and for people to see. And one of the steps that sort of, if not sort of after you start adding connections, but sort of pretty soon after, is to visit the settings page on any social network site and sort of set your privacy to where you think it should be, whether that's on Twitter saying that, no, I want to approve whoever's getting my tweets, or, you know, making it open to the world. The other thing as an organization that we need to sort of respect other staff members and their need for privacy, that nobody should be forced to be a member of a social network site. Similar to sort of my feeling that nobody should be forced not to, that there may be some policy regarding their activity, but particularly that there are concerns for domestic violence survivors and other people in terms of being available on those sites. The other thing to think about is security, from thinking about it in terms of your network and your infrastructure, that computers are very sort of essential to how legal aid and pro bono programs work. And that when your computer is down, that means that often that there's a lot of work or some tools that you're not able to use. And so it shouldn't be you shouldn't be asked to make the decision between, you know, a social network site and security of your network in most cases, but that you do need to take sort of similar precautions to those that you would be in terms of email or opening up sort of funky websites that you don't know anything about, and making certain that you take into account that if you click on a link that somebody's passing around and you don't know what it is, that you could get a virus or some other sort of malware, and that could make it so that you're not able to do your job. And your IT staff probably have some guidance in sort of how you can think about that and sort of figure out where to draw the line in terms of how people should participate at work in terms of the security concerns. Another concern that people often have, particularly organizations, is control over message. As Matthew pointed out, that social network sites aren't the same as a press release. It's not very static, and that how I talk about a project may be very different than how one of my other colleagues talk about a project. What I've heard from sort of who I consider the experts is that it doesn't matter whether if you think you have control over your message now, you're probably wrong, that there are plenty of people out there who are talking about you without consulting with you first. And so this is just, social network sites are often for an organization an opportunity to participate in that conversation and potentially correct some misinformation. The other piece that people are often concerned about is information overload. It's a very valid concern that there's a lot of noise out there. Doing things like listening and sort of setting, you know, a space a set amount of time that you're going to participate on social network sites works in terms of trying to limit some of that information overload. The other thing that often people can do is that they choose to follow a smaller number of people. And one of the things that I've found for myself is that when I start small, that once I'm able to sort of manage that number, that I often can add a few more without having problems. That sort of the processes that I've set up help me sort of manage that information. And then there will hit another point when, I've hit too many people and I need to come back because there's too much information and it's starting to be overwhelming. And that's sort of a natural piece that, using social network sites and email, that you sort of have to work out and figure out how it's going to work for you, and that just because your boundaries are different than somebody else's, it doesn't mean that they're wrong. So, and then we have a list of quite a few resources here, which I had intended on maybe going through, but Jason probably want to open it up to some questions.
Sure. Just a couple of things, if you wouldn't mind following up. One, there is some concern about the amount of time involved in doing this, being involved in social networking, and in particular the feeling of already being overwhelmed with information through email and such, and now this is another new area to get into. Maybe just give very briefly kind of your view on the trade-off. Is it worth investing the time in getting into these social networks? Is there a payoff to that time invested, especially when one is already feeling overwhelmed by other information resources?
I do think that there is a payoff. Speaking from my perspective, that I think that the payoff is in terms of being able to build relationships that I wouldn't be able to otherwise. That frequently a lot of the pieces that come to me through my newsreader or email are just sort of they're work things, and that they're just pieces to be processed, and that when it comes to social networking, that often it's a matter of reading something but then being able to respond and say, hey, yeah, I agree with that, or congratulations on your new baby, or just sort of little bits and pieces. That being said, I've definitely had my moments when I've felt overwhelmed, and that I've often even seen people who are sort of paid social network strategists take and spend time where they're disconnected, and it's often sort of trying to find a happy medium. And for one person that may be sort of 5 minutes a day, and another person it may be half an hour. I think the other piece that I'm sort of attempting to sort of accustom myself to, although it's hard, is the fact that you don't have to know everything that's happening on a social network site. That for me, Twitter is sort of often like a river you jump into when you have time, and then you step away when you're done with it, and that whatever happens when I'm not there, happens when I'm not there, and that if it's important, it'll come up later, or somebody will bring it up again. And so I don't have to keep up with what everybody connected to me has said during the many hours that I'm not on Twitter.
I think a good analogy to that is one that around, the way that we interact at a party. When we come into a conversation, it's not necessarily the case that we know everything that's been said for the last half an hour, but we're able to sort of move into the conversation and interact successfully, even though we haven't been part of it. So I think it does involve sort of changing your approach to some of the amount of time that you're investing, or the amount of resources that you're investing. But I think that Kate's exactly right, that you can sort of get out of it as much as you're willing to put into it. And I think, for example, there are also tools like Twitter feed is one of them, that allow you, if you already have an RSS feed on your organization's blog or websites, you can just hook that feed into your Twitter account. It'll automatically make updates as new resources are posted. And I think that the amount of the amount in which you'd want to engage with your followers is really up to you. For some folks, that's really where that's the important interaction that's happened. For others, it's just getting the information out. And I think taking baby steps and sort of understanding what the time and resource constraints are going to be is an important first step as you begin to experiment with these different tools.
Well, and on that note, I see that our time is up for today, so I'd like to thank, on behalf of the editorial team of Clearinghouse Review, all of you who participated in our webinar today, and especially thank Matthew and Kate for this really wonderful presentation and their very excellent article in the July-August issue of Clearinghouse Review this year. And we hope that you all will stay in touch with us here. We like to hear from you and what you would like to see us do in the pages of Clearinghouse Review. Please check out our Facebook page at facebook.com/Shriver Center or our Twitter feed at twitter.com/Shriver Center. And you can also email us at clearinghousereview@povertylaw.org. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day.